A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks so much for being a part of the program today. We're going to do things a little bit differently because we're going to have a pretty long conversation with Larry Keane of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, who joins us right now. Larry, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
It's always a pleasure to spend time with you, Cam.
And I'm glad you booked out a couple of minutes here because we got a lot of stuff to talk about. I hardly even know where to get started, but let's start with what the House Judiciary Committee did yesterday, marking up a ban on modern sporting rifles. The breathless headlines, first time in 20 years that the House has taken up a ban on so-called assault weapons. It's unclear whether or not there are actually the votes to get this out of the full House next week. According to David Cicilline a couple of days ago, they were still, quote, 1 or 2 votes short. There are a couple of Democrats that have come out in opposition, a couple of Republicans who may be leaning towards supporting this. But what is NSSF's reaction and response to the idea that, A, banning the purchase or sale of the most commonly sold rifles in the country is constitutional, practical, or effective at reducing violent crime?
Well, thanks for having us, Cam. First, the bill goes far beyond just banning modern sporting rifles. It will ban a very large number of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that are commonly used for target shooting, for bird hunting, for sporting clays and such. So it goes way beyond just banning the AR-15 platform, for example. And the bill that they passed out of committee last night also restricts magazine capacity. They landed on 15 round capacity versus 10. So I don't, again, that number is utterly arbitrary. So we'll see early next week whether they have, I think, the votes to move forward. It will be very, very close one way or the other. There are a very large number of Democrats that are sponsoring this bill. Whether they will continue to sponsor it or support it when it goes to the floor, we'll see. There are a couple of Democrats that are on the bubble. There are several Democrats in very competitive races who are reported to be very upset with Speaker Pelosi for pushing this issue when they're in competitive races, and they're concerned that it'll hurt their chances at re-election. So we'll see what they do. And there are maybe 2 Republicans who are considered as possibly leaning towards voting yes, Adam Kinzinger and Chris Jacobs from New York, both of whom are retiring. I think the field of Democrats that are gettable from our point of view is they're locked in. I think we're trying to find out for sure. But so it'll be very close. I think we'll know if she has the votes, if she moves it to the Rules Committee, so they can go to the floor with it later in the week, next week. If it doesn't move forward, early next week and to the Rules Committee, which is a necessary step before it goes to the floor, that would indicate to me she doesn't have the votes. But she won't put it on the floor if she doesn't have the votes, and I don't think she'll move it to the Rules Committee if she hasn't, counted votes and is confident it'll pass. But again, if it passes, it'll be by just 1, 2, 3 or so votes. And if it fails, if it gets a vote and it fails, it'll be something in that order as well, unless a number of Democrats say we're not going to support this because it goes too far. It goes way beyond just banning modern sporting rifles. As I said, it reaches semi-automatic shotguns, which detachable magazines or tubular magazines that can hold more than 5 rounds. Well, with mini shells, everyone can hold more than 5 rounds. And if it has a grip, a grip, and detachable stock, well, every stock is detachable. So anyway, we'll see. I do think that they're doing this, as you mentioned, in the face of the recent Supreme Court decision that made clear, if there's no text, history, or tradition of restricting the conduct owning rifles and shotguns, It's not going to pass constitutional muster. So I don't think it will, but we're going to find out soon enough how the lower courts now will apply the Bruin decision. I think I can guess where some of them are going to say, or we heard a little bit of that yesterday in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where an anti-gun law professor from Duke Law School and their Firearms Policy Center basically said modern sporting rifles could be banned because they are quote unquote unusually dangerous. So they're going to try and lump them in with like sawed-off shotguns and such, which of course, you know, and as NSSF put out yesterday, through 2020, we estimate that there are now roughly 24.5 million modern sporting rifles in civilian possession just since 1990.
Yeah.
And of course, the product's been on the market since the early 60s. And again, this does not include 21 or year to date in 22. So when we come out with those numbers next year, I'm confident it's going to be 26 million or more.
Well, and I mean, as you guys pointed out, there are more modern sporting rifles in the hands of law-abiding Americans than there are Ford F-Series pickup trucks on American roads. And I don't think anybody would call Ford F-150 an unusual firearm. So I think these arms are in common use, as opposed to being, as far as being unusually dangerous goes. The FBI crime statistics have shown year after year that these are firearms that are not used in a lot of crimes. They may be used in high-profile crimes, but they're not used in a lot of homicides or assaults. In fact, every year, fists and feet account for more homicides and
objects.
Exactly. So I understand, the gun control lobby is going to come up with the best argument they think they can come up with. I don't think it's going to stand court scrutiny. And I don't think, frankly, even if this bill passes the House, I don't think it's going anywhere in the Senate right now.
I don't believe it will go anywhere in the Senate. The last time Senator Feinstein got a vote on her amendment, it failed miserably. Every time it gets a vote in the Senate, it gets fewer and fewer votes. So I don't think it has even close to 50, let alone 60 votes to move it forward. So,
but again, I mean, at least they're being honest with what they want, or at least semi-honest about what they want, because ultimately, I don't think they want a so-called assault ban with a grandfather clause in it. I think they want to tell Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in. But they are making their intentions at least somewhat known here with this bill. And I think, I know that they're trying to gin up support among the Democratic base. The Democrats say they want fighters right now. And so this is an attempt to show we're fighting. But they're also going to, I think, gin up interest among Republicans and among conservatives and among independents who say, listen, banning our way to safety is not the way to go. And if you guys want to make gun control an issue this election, we're concerned about putting food on the table. We're concerned about the rising cost of inflation for everything that we're buying these days. We're concerned about our job security. We're concerned about the possibility of a recession. But hey, you want to talk about gun control? You want to go after our right to keep our arms? All right, we can talk about that. And there's another reason for me to vote against you. That's going to be the case for, I think, a fair number of Americans. But let's talk about a couple of other things, because, again, we got a lot of stuff going on here. We saw Steve Dettelbach sworn in as head of the ATF this week. We also saw this week, Larry, this really disturbing story out of Wilmington, Delaware, where a gun owner was paid a visit by a local law enforcement and several ATF officials who said that they were part of a straw purchase task force, and they knew that this guy had purchased some guns a few months ago. They just wanted to see if he still had these guns. Again, no reason to suspect that this guy was involved in any criminal activity whatsoever. He ended up recording the entire conversation on his doorbell cam. When you see situations like that unfolding, at the same time, the gun control lobby has just installed one of their own, basically, as ATF director. How concerned are you about what the Biden administration is going to do with the ATF to try to weaponize it as an agency that's not about regulating the firearms industry or ensuring that current laws are being followed, but viewing the industry as an adversary that is meant to be destroyed?
Well, when you have a president who calls the industry, quote unquote, the enemy, when you have this, quote unquote, zero tolerance policy, and you have revocations up 500%, and the basis for these revocations have nothing to do with any risk to public safety, where you have closed inspections being reopened after 6 months, and then finding that, when seeking a revoke 6 months later after they said it didn't rise to that level. Very, very troubling. So we're really concerned about this. This approach from the administration, instead of going after the trigger pullers and the bad people, and there are a lot of people out there that need to be locked up, going after law-abiding citizens who exercise a constitutional right, showing up unannounced at their doorstep, trying to coerce them into letting them into their house with no warrant. That's troubling. How many cops and state troopers and agents were there instead of working the streets to put bad guys and getting the trigger pullers? So that's troubling. We have to deal with ATF as the industry. They're the regulator, but we are concerned about these policies. And, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully now, as a confirmed director, he can push back on the direction coming from the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General to revoke licenses and get focused again on going after the trigger pullers and not harassing law-abiding dealers. I will tell you that these policies have badly affected the cooperative relationship between industry and ATF. Dealers have always been the #1 source of information to ATF that leads to illegal firearms trafficking cases. Dealers are not picking up the phone and calling ATF anymore because they're petrified they're going to be subject to an inspection and that ATF will find some mistake they made and revoke their license. They're not calling to self-report if they made a mistake and how do I correct it. That's not happening. They're not cooperating with ATF because they're afraid they're going to have their livelihood and their business destroyed. So it's unproductive. It doesn't advance public safety. You have an administration that wants more inspectors than special agents. That's a problem. That's the wrong focus. So hopefully we'll see some course correction under the new director. We're certainly going to challenge him and bring these issues to his attention, and we'll see how it goes. But we are concerned.
Well, okay, and again, I think rightfully so. So let's talk about courts, both courts of law and the courts of public opinion. We have seen, again, a number of, Federal Trade Commission complaints filed by gun control groups lately. A number of lawsuits filed against the firearms manufacturers over their marketing practices. We saw state of California institute a new law that in essence bans any firearms that are designed for junior shooters, any marketing materials that are aimed at junior shooters. That's being challenged in court right now. Talk, if you can, about the attempt to destroy the industry, again, in both courts of law and the courts of public opinion, and to, again, ensure that Americans not only don't have the right to keep and bear arms, but they don't even have their First Amendment right to talk about the right to keep and bear arms.
Look, Phil, this law in California is obviously unconstitutional. It obviously violates the First Amendment right to speech, First Amendment right for freedom of association, and it violates the due process clause because it says, what's attractive to a minor. Well, what does that mean? Right? Mm-hmm. That's a totally vague and subjective standard. I feel like I've gone back in a time machine to Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine to the late 1990s. We're hearing all of the same arguments from the same gun control groups, trying to file lawsuits against the industry. House Judiciary just last night also passed a bill to repeal the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act and to repeal the Tiahrt Amendment that prevents the disclosure of law enforcement sensitive trace information outside of law enforcement because it puts law enforcement at risk, in danger, and can interfere with ongoing criminal investigations. So all of this is going on, but I think they know that they don't have the votes to repeal the PLCAA, certainly not in the Senate, and I don't think they even have it in the House. So we'll see next week whether they think they do or not. But, they want to sue us. They want to, and so they're coming up with these theories. We saw it in the Soto case in Connecticut. They're trying to make everything about marketing. They come up with these gimmicks. The new focus group tested term weapon of war. Even the AP style manual said shouldn't be saying assault weapons. It's misleading. It's a false term. It is, as you know, a politically created term by Josh Sugarman, who's the Violence Policy Center, to mislead the American public to think you're banning machine guns when you're not. You're just banning ordinary semi-automatic rifles. So there's a lot of focus on this. They're filing these complaints with the FTC. NSSF, we just submitted a letter to the FTC on this. They fundraise off of it. So they want to, they have disdain for the Second Amendment, and they're entitled to their opinion, but they're not entitled to try to suppress the First Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, law-abiding companies, from being able to advertise their products. These, they can't point to advertisements that says that what you said is false. It's not true, right? It's all opinion. They don't like the advertising because they don't like the product. And so they want to try to use these theories to ban the advertising and try to say your advertising violates some amorphous state law that allows it to fit in the predicate exception. And so we saw that in the Soto case. They're trying to weaponize that marketing theory. We've seen it now, with this law. We see this in the lawsuit against Smith & Wesson in California, trying to claim their advertising, somehow responsible for the actions of a deranged individual. Or they say your advertising, they literally say this, that the industry is specifically targeting their ads to deranged young men who have these fantasies of, committing mass murder. It's literally what they say.
Yeah.
It's patently absurd.
And they're well, listen, and their evidence for this, I believe, in the California case was, or no, I guess this was the Federal Trade Commission complaint filed against Daniel Defense, was using Call of Duty hashtags on Instagram, because nobody over the age of 18 plays Call of Duty, and a picture with Post Malone. Now, Larry, listen, I'm 48 years old. I said this at Barry and Arms the other day. My wife, who's 9 years older than I am, was the one who actually introduced me to Post Malone. And even though I'm sure Post Malone is going, oh, God, I can't believe Cam likes me, I like Post Malone's music. I'm not 18 years old. Again, these subjective standards, they carry no real weight, but they are designed, as you pointed out, to demonize the firearms industry and, frankly, to demonize gun ownership. Because I think they understand what the Bruin decision really means for them. And if they can't ban guns in the home, they can't ban people from carrying guns for self-defense. Soon, I think they're not going to be able to ban AR-15s or modern sporting rifles. They're not going to be able to ban "quote unquote" large capacity magazines. Well, what's left now? It's really, again, it's about attacking those who exercise that right.
And so that's what the California law is about. It's not just stopping the advertising. They want to stop the next generation from, participating in hunting and the shooting sports. That's what that's about, right? They are trying to, choke off the oxygen, to the quote unquote gun culture, right? They're trying to suppress First Amendment speech about Second Amendment activities. They have utter disdain for the Second Amendment, and they have utter disdain for our community. That's just the fact, right?
Yeah.
What they're doing is tried and true playbook. We saw this 20 years ago in the municipal lawsuits, the Hamilton lawsuit, chin up bogus science, then demonize the product, and then try to ban it and bring lawsuits to put you out of business. That's why they want to repeal the PLCA, and they want access to trace data. They want to go back to the late 1990s and the city lawsuits and try to bankrupt the industry and force us to capitulate to gun control measures through, regulation through litigation. Nothing new here. We've seen this before. Every town just put out a report this morning listing the top manufacturers of firearms recovered from a number of Democrat cities with high crime problems, like New York. It's a name and shame play. We've seen this before. suggesting that Glock, Smith & Wesson, and Ruger, and Taurus, for example, are somehow responsible for criminals obtaining firearms and bringing them illegally into those cities and using them in crime. That's like saying Ford, Chevy, GM, and Toyota are, the manufacturer of choice for drunk drivers. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly what they're doing. And again, I think, it's not just up to the industry, but I think it is up to gun owners to push back against this ridiculous campaign as well. Listen, we've only got a couple of minutes left here. So I do want to ask you, we had talked about the Democrats' gun control legislation. Let's talk about a bill that's been offered by Republicans, the Return Our Constitutional Rights Act, which was sponsored by Representative Andrew Clyde. I think there are like 57 co-sponsors. This would end all of the federal taxes and fees associated with gun purchases. It would, end the Pittman-Robertson Fund. It would end the NFA tax. Representative Clyde says, according to the bill, there would be money allocated to these wildlife restoration programs through unspent lease, oil and gas leases on federal lands. What's the NSSF's position on the Return Our Constitutional Rights Act?
We've spoken with the congressman about this. We indicated this when this was a discussion point. He ran on this issue. We told him even before he got to Congress, this is not something the industry would support. It is not, the Pittman-Robertson excise tax is not a tax on the Second Amendment. That tax is paid by the manufacturers. And so, is that cost reflected in the overall cost of the product, just like the cost of labor, raw material, energy, insurance, and other taxes like payroll taxes. It all rolls up into the overall cost of the product, but it's not a tax in the Second Amendment. And there's no firearm out there that somebody couldn't purchase because of the Pittman-Robertson excise tax. Those funds, which was $1.5 billion last year, is what pays for the primary source of wildlife conservation funding. That includes using the states using those funds for hunter education and for building public shooting ranges, which is something we've been working with state agencies to do. So we don't support this. What he's proposing would actually reduce wildlife conservation funding, reduce the opportunity for shooting ranges on public lands where people can exercise their Second Amendment rights, even if they never go afield, where they can teach firearm safety education, where hunters can go in and sight in on their rifles. So, and it's not just NSSF that's opposed to this. And our manufacturers, as you know, our board is filled with the major firearms and ammunition manufacturers, strongly opposed to this. And there aren't 57 co-sponsors anymore because at least 4 members have already pulled their name off the bill. And we understand more will come off the bill because they now understand this is really not a good idea. It's not good policy. It's not an infringement upon the Second Amendment. And so the excise tax has existed since about 1919. In the 1930s, the industry asked that those taxes that the manufacturers were paying would be used for wildlife conservation funding, because at the time, wildlife in the United States was being decimated. And we've had this, the North American model of conservation funding is the envy of the world. That's why we have so much wildlife in this country, why the American eagle has been restored from the brink, why there's more deer and turkey, etc., than there have been since the colonial times. It's because of this funding source. All the conservation community across the board opposes this because they understand how important Pittman-Robertson excise tax is to wildlife conservation. And if the industry thought it was a tax on the Second Amendment, we would support a repeal. But it just isn't a tax on the Second Amendment any more than the payroll tax manufacturers have to pay is a tax on the Second Amendment. It just isn't.
Do you think, and I appreciate you explaining that, but do you think that, because this is one of the things that has always bothered me, gun owners, first of all, there are a lot of gun owners who don't hunt.
Right.
So their purchases, and this excise tax that's being paid on a firearm that's not used for hunting, still going to fund these wildlife conservation programs. Meanwhile, you've got, bird watchers who go out and buy a pair of binoculars. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with Pittman-Robertson, right? So would you like to see the Pittman-Robertson Act expanded to include things that go beyond firearms and ammunition? And I guess we've got the Anglers Act as well. So there are some, fishing items that are included here. But why shouldn't somebody who buys a Yeti cooler or who buys a pop-up tent also be kicking in a couple of bucks, to help fund wildlife conservation?
So there have been discussions about broadening what the tax applies to, for example, tree stands for deer hunting, as an example. So there have been discussions about that. One of the issues with repealing Pittman-Robertson is that hunters and the industry will lose our seat at the table. And so then it won't matter what we think. It won't matter what hunters think about how that money, which would be cut in half basically under this proposal, and it's based on, by the way, oil and gas leases. Well, under this administration, do you think that number's going up or down? Right. So it's not a reliable funding stream under this administration or any future Democrat administration. We lose our seat at the table. And then groups like Sierra Club and birdwatching groups and anti-hunting groups will have a say about how the funds are used. And again, we work very hard to change the Pittman-Robertson law that applies to the states about how they can use those funds to make it easier for the states to build shooting ranges so that people who never go afield get a return on their investment, if you will. So we worked very hard and we were successful in doing that so that there will now be more shooting ranges for people to use, that don't belong to private ranges or gun clubs. So, there has been discussion about that, like binoculars, but, we don't want to lose our ability to have a say in how those funds are spent. And hunting is still a very important part of this industry. But we are, the argument for modifying the Pittman-Robertson formula for using money for ranges was led by NSSF and the industry. And the argument was because shooters who never go afield deserve a return on their investment. And we were successful.
Well, listen, I appreciate you taking a few minutes out of what I'm sure is a very busy day to talk about some of these issues. I look forward to doing this again very soon, but I'd also encourage folks to head to nssf.org. You guys are constantly putting out new information, and it is a great resource, not only for members of the industry, but for gun owners as well. Larry, thank you again for your time, sir. I look forward to catching up with you again very soon.
It's always great to spend time with you. I won't say anything about the Yankees and the Red Sox.
And listen, I couldn't even tell you what the standings are in the AL East right now. I have paid so little attention to baseball this year. I've got so much other stuff going on, as I'm sure you do. So congratulations for actually, knowing how things are going. I couldn't tell you who's in the lead at the moment, but I wish your Yankees all the failure in the world.
Well, just one quick last thing. We touched on a little bit, the elections are coming up in the midterms. I just cannot stress how important it is that gun owners get registered to vote, get educated, and on election day, and that starts way before election day, as you know.
Yep.
Don't risk your rights. Gun vote. We need to be sure that we get, pro Second Amendment, pro industry, pro sportsman members elected to Congress and the Senate, so we can stop this Biden administration. We can stop, this anti-gun agenda by Nancy Pelosi, and the vast majority of Democrats in the House are anti-gun. It's a terrible thing to say, but you can count on one hand the members of the Democrat caucus in the House who are not anti-gun. Almost the entire caucus is sponsoring this ban on the most popular rifle being sold in America. This is, the future of the Second Amendment is at stake, and it's no joke. And the future of the industry, if they succeed in repealing the PLCAA, we will be bankrupted. And that's the plan. That's what the plan was 20 years ago, and that's the plan now. Sue
Yep.
the industry out of existence or make them capitulate because they can't afford to fight anymore. You need to get registered to vote, and on election day, gun vote. Please, if you care about the Second Amendment, if you care about your rights, you must do this and make sure everyone you know does it as well. Don't just do it yourself. Get out there and get your friends, your family members, your colleagues, your coworkers. If they care about the Second Amendment, we need to stand up and fight back, and we need to do that now.
Yep, absolutely right. Larry, again, thank you so much for your time, sir. I look forward to doing this again soon. And thank you for tuning into this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. We will be back on Monday with another edition, but we'll be updating the website, of course, throughout the weekend with the latest Second Amendment news and information. Until we talk again, be well, be safe, and be free.